2024 is in the books for the UFC, a year which saw the end of the 200s era and the start of a new era with the 300s. This was a monumental year for the UFC to push the envelope and see if they could top what was a legendary 2023, with a chance to build new and the future stars, to expand and build new partnerships, and even push the boundaries on what was possible for combat sports entertainment. 2024 delivered 14 pay-per-views of varied level of entertainment and success, and we are going to look into all 14 and find out what was the best of the best. This is the Fight franchise, and every UFC pay-per-view of 2024 ranked from worst to best. Number 14, UFC 302. The worst pay-per-view of 2024, which failed to deliver on nearly every level except the main event. UFC 302 was given the experiment to be the first pay-per-view with the new UFC gloves, which would be scrapped nearly 6 months later. These gloves cursed the entire card, delivering 9 decisions and 3 submissions. We was not even treated to a KO. The early prelims and prelims were pretty basic, with nothing special, with a finish from Jailton Almeida. The main card was not much better, with Randy Brown beating Alessio Zaleski dos Santos and Nico Price getting the win over Alex Morono, and Kevin Holland getting a submission in a quick fight against Mikhail Olaslejczak. The co-main event was a hype bout going in, where we was promised a war between Sean Strickland and Paulo Costa, but we got a fight which was pretty one-sided, with Sean Strickland dominating on the feet, even though wildly it was a split decision. The main card was the shining light of this pay-per-view, and had it not delivered, this could be argued in the worst UFC pay-per-views ever. Dustin Poirier, in his last attempt at undisputed gold, took on at the time the pound for pound king Islam Makhachev, where they had a legendary back and forth fight where Dustin overachieved in a fight many thought he was going to be easy pickings for Islam Makhachev. Across 5 rounds, a competitive war took place where midway into the 5th round, off a beautiful ankle pick, Islam got the choke to defend his title in an epic fight. Go back and watch this fight, it was legendary stuff, but everything else can be skipped. UFC 302 was easily the worst card of the year. Number 13, UFC 297. In 2023, for UFC 289, the UFC went to Canada and gave us the worst card of 2023. Lucky for Canada, they improved 1 spot and gave us the second worst card of 2024. The first pay-per-view of 2024 was headlined by a fun bout, with Sean Strickland defending his world title versus DDP in a heated bout with a lot of hype going into it. The two men put on a war and the fight of the night in a competitive and close scrap, which went the way of the South African, which was cool to see him crown the champ, though quite a few people, including myself, thought Strickland won. The co-main event was a bit of a dud, for vacant gold between Raquel Pennington beating Mayra Bueno Silva, but it was cool to see Pennington become champion. The rest of the card was okay, stacked with Canadian talent, where the men finished 0-7 with all of them taking a loss, with the most notable loss being Mike Maylott losing to Neil Magny in what was quite the comeback win for Magny. Movsar Evloev and Arnold Allen had a cool scrap, and the Canadian women represented, with submission wins for Jasmine Jasdavicius and a TKO for Gillian Robertson. Overall, this card wasn't really stacked with much talent and didn't make for the most fun viewing. Just overall, compared to UFC 302, was just slightly better, with more finishes and had more than one decent fight. Number 12, UFC 309. The annual MSG card, which is usually giving us massive pay-per-views and moments, is usually a staple of the UFC calendar year. A majority of years delivers one of the best pay-per-views of the year. 2024, however, skipped on that memo. A bout headlined by John Jones and Stipe Miocic, which was supposed to happen at MSG in 2023, was overshadowed by the fact that the world wanted to see John Jones take on Tom Aspinall. Jones and Stipe squared off in a predictable bout where Jones schooled Stipe across 3 rounds, where he capped off the fight with a spinning body kick which crumpled Stipe to the canvas, which was a cool moment, but the fight was just so one-sided it just made for a predictable ending. After the fight, we did see a legend of MMA in Stipe hang up the gloves. The rest of the main card was nothing special, with the co-main event being a great performance where Charles Oliveira dominated Michael Chandler. However, we did get quite a scare and a fun 5th round, with Chandler almost turning the fight around and even ending the fight with some entertaining backslams. The rest of the main card was just some average decisions. The prelims and early prelims had a bit more fun entertainment, with some finishes courtesy of Jim Miller, Marcin Tybura, Ramiz Brahimaj and Oban Elliott. Overall, a pretty lackluster card with some fun moments sprinkled in. Number 11, UFC 307. 2024 was a year where many fighters made headlines and shocked the world, and even broke through to the mainstream of MMA. But one man in 2024 built himself to become the face of the sport. Alex Pereira would be the king and hero of 2024, stepping up, saving pay-per-views, and being the headline star of 3 pay-per-views. UFC 307 was the third and the final of those pay-per-views, and the worst of the 3 he headlined, but no fault of his own. A card with a lackluster supporting act which barely delivered, with early prelims prelims seeing 2 submissions with Court McGee and Ryan Spann getting the submissions, and we saw Carla Esparza in her final fight. The prelims were nothing special with 3 decisions, but Stephen Thompson and Joaquin Buckley had a competitive bout where Buckley KO'd Wonderboy with a spectacular leaping hook to create a highlight for the pay-per-view and the year. The main card sucked and was very boring, with Kayla Harrison beating Ketlin Vieira in a boring bout. Delidze dominated Holland, who injured his rib and couldn't continue. Mario Batista started World War III with the MMA fans worldwide in a boring bout, holding Aldo against the cage. The co-main event was a competitive bout between Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena, which had some moments but the wrong lady won. The saving grace of this entire card was Alex Pereira and Khalil Rountree, who capped off a dull main card with a bloody war, where Pereira fought back from adversity to KO and finished Khalil Rountree in the 4th round in a beautiful striking battle on the feet, which saved this card from being the worst of the year. But for having decent entertainment on the prelims and a fun main event, ranks this higher than those before it. Number 10, UFC 304. The UFC gave us another pay-per-view in England. However, instead of headlining the capital of England, they went to Manchester, 100 pay-per-views later since the last time at UFC 204. This pay-per-view had a lot of annoyance from the UK MMA fans, as the pay-per-view was taking place from 1 AM to 6 AM, rather than running on UK time. This led to an event which delivered some decent action, but also some lackluster moments. The early prelims had some cool moments and finishes from Mick Parkin getting a KO, and submissions from Modestas Bukauskas and Sam Patterson. The prelims were done with 4 straight decisions with not much action, including Makayev and Manel Kape, which had a lot of hype and bad blood but was not at all entertaining. The main card, Arnold Allen and Giga Chikadze put on a scrap. Gregory Rodriguez and Christian Leroy Duncan had an average fight. Paddy Pimblett showed the world the hype was real after some average performances, securing a quick submission versus Bobby Green. Tom Aspinall took on Curtis Blades in a huge rematch where Aspinall KO'd Blades in 1 minute. And the main event was a boring domination from Bilal, with Leon Edwards having a few moments of success, but was crazy to see Bilal, an unlikely contender, come through the welterweight rankings and become champion. Overall, this was quite a bland card with moments of brilliance sprinkled in. Shame really, as the last 2 UK pay-per-views have not been the best. Let's hope next year we get something that delivers for the die-hard UK fans. Number 9, UFC 301, the arguable least stacked card of the year, which followed up the monumental UFC 300. UFC 301 had a tough gig, having to deliver an epic pay-per-view with the UFC travelling back to Brazil. The card was stacked with Brazilian talent top to bottom, including a returning Jose Aldo, with a main event seeing Alexandre Pantoja looking to defend his title with out-of-nowhere contender in Steve Erceg, who many people before the fight were making memes of competing for the title. The prelims delivered some decent moments with finishes from Alessandro Costa and Mauricio Ruffi, and later on in the card, Yoanderson Brito finishing Jack Shaw. The main card delivered some real fun action and great moments, with Kyle Bahalio finishing Paul Craig. Following this, Mikel Pereira put Ihor Pretoria to sleep, and this was followed by Anthony Smith getting a quick guillotine against Vitor Petrino. This was followed with the feel-good moment of the card and a chance for fans to see a legend of MMA turn back the clock, where Jose Aldo took on Jonathan Martinez, where Aldo schooled Martinez across 3 rounds to get a brilliant win in his return fight in just over 2 years, especially after his last fight before this against Merab was an abomination or one of the worst fights ever. This was followed by a scrappy main event where Pantoja and Erceg went back and forth in a competitive bout for 5 rounds, where Pantoja won the decision, though some fans did claim that Erceg won. A really decent card which had fun moments throughout, was just missing that all-out fight of the night which usually steals the show. Number 8, UFC 310. The final pay-per-view of 2024 delivered a stacked card with fun fights all over, which unfortunately didn't deliver the barn burner potential it had. A card which was originally scheduled to be main evented by the new welterweight champ Bilal Muhammad facing off against Shavkat Rakhmonov, but Bilal had to pull out due to a toe injury, where Ian Gary stepped in to face Shavkat in a dull and tentative fight, where the only cool moment was when Ian Gary in the 5th round almost got the rear naked choke in what would have been quite the upset win, but Shavkat survived to win quite the dull fight. The main event was a 2-round masterclass where Alexandre Pantoja dominated Kai Asakura to secure the 2nd round choke to defend his title in a cool and definitive performance. The rest of the main card was weird, with Cyril Gane and Volkov having a technical battle where Volkov seemed to do the better, but Gane was gifted the win. Bryce Mitchell elbowed Kron Gracie with a brilliant 3rd round KO after a boring fight, and Do Hoo Choi put on a clinic against Nate Landwehr. The rest of the prelims and early prelims had some finishes and fun fights, with Vincente Luque Luque turning back the clock, getting a quick finish. Movsar Evloev and Aljamain Sterling had a super competitive and fun bout which showed the entertaining side of grappling, along with some other fun fights and finishes across the prelims and early prelims. Just none of the fights hit that 4th and 5th gear of all-out war, and some of the fights were duds, but nonetheless cool finishes across the night and some fun competitive fights gets this pay-per-view a decent ranking. Number 7, UFC 306. The UFC in 2024 delivered a one-of-one spectacle, with the UFC heading to Las Vegas and the new arena, the Sphere, to put on an epic show which was to commemorate Mexican fighting heritage and Mexican culture. This was a card full of Mexican talent from top to bottom, headlined by 2 title fights, with Alexa Grasso looking to defend her title versus Valentina Shevchenko in the trilogy bout, and Sean O'Malley looking to defend versus Merab Dvalishvili. The whole card delivered some really great and fun fights, with some great prelims where Ketlin Souza submitted Yasmin Jauregui and Ignacio Bahamondes KO'd Manuel Torres in a great performance, and Norma Dumont opened up one of the worst cuts, beating up on Irene Aldana, and Joshua Van and Edgar Chairez had a fun scrap. The main card, Ronaldo Rodriguez and O'Day Osborne had a wicked fight and one of the best fights of the night, beating up on each other where Rodriguez won the decision. Followed this was another war and scrap where Esteban Ribovics and Daniel Zellhuber had an amazing scrap which Ribovics won. Diego Lopez battered Brian Ortega in a statement-making performance. At this point the Sphere was tracking as a legendary card until Valentina Shevchenko dominated Alexa Grasso in a boring performance where she just controlled in the grappling, which took all the momentum out of the card. And the main event, Merab dominated Sean O'Malley to become undisputed champion. A great card let down by the main and co-main event, but the highlight of the card was the Sphere, which put on an epic backdrop for the fight and had great short movies to show off Mexican culture. A very good card let down by the co-main and main event. Number 6, UFC 303. International Fight Week, a fight card which originally was supposed to be the return of Conor McGregor taking on Michael Chandler, where McGregor pulled out due to injury, which was a card which had a new replacement in a short notice main event and the shortest notice co-main event in UFC history. After McGregor pulled out of the fight, the UFC called on the biggest star in the sport at present, Alex Pereira, who would rematch Jiri Prochazka, where the two squared off, where Pereira dominated Jiri and put him out cold after dropping him at the end of round 1 and then flattening Jiri with a head kick at the start of round 2 and finishing him with follow-up shots to secure an epic moment to end the night of fights and another defense of his title. This card also featured a co-main event of Brian Ortega taking on Diego Lopez, where Ortega pulled out the day of the fight. So with a few hours notice, Dan Ige stepped up and put on a fun short notice scrap. Macy Chasson got a finish on the main card, however Ian Gary and MVP was a dud, with Gary opting to grapple and Roman Dolidze on short notice beat up Anthony Smith. The prelims delivered some amazing entertainment with some finishes from Joe Pfeiffer, Gene Silver and Peyton Tabot, who got a 17-second KO, and Andre Feely and Cub Swanson put on a great scrap. The early prelims were all decisions, which let this card down a bit, but for some great prelims and some real good moments on the main card, including the finish from Pereira, earns UFC 303 a decent spot, especially saving the card after McGregor pulled out. Number 5, UFC 298. The second pay-per-view of 2024, which saw Alexander Volkanovski returning to featherweight after his second failed attempt at Champ, where he was taking on a confident Ilia Topuria in a stacked card full of fun fights. The prelims and early prelims had scrappy and fun action throughout, with great competitive fights, with some fun finishes from Danny Barlow, Zhang Mingyang getting a brilliant finish, and Marcos Rogerio de Lima leg kicking Junior Taffa. And the decisions on the prelims and early prelims were good scraps, with Mackenzie Dern and Amanda Lemos having a fun fight which stole the fight of the night. The main card was stacked, with Anthony Hernandez securing the submission to stop the hype train of Roman Kopylov, who was on a 4-fight win streak. Merab Dvalishvili and Henry Cejudo had a competitive bout where Cejudo would steal round 1, but Merab fought back in round 2 and 3 to take over the fight and defeat Cejudo to put himself in title contention. Jeff Neal and Ian Gary was a cagey affair with not much action, where Gary won the decision. Robert Whittaker and Paulo Costa put on a fun scrap, where Costa had success in round 1, but round 2 and 3 Whittaker fought back from adversity to win a great decision. The main event saw one of the moments of the year and a changing of the guard at featherweight, where in a 2-round bout after a back and forth fight on the feet, Topuria would put Volk's lights out to secure the KO in what was an epic moment and one of the best moments of the year. This card delivered throughout and was one of the better cards of the year, with some really great fights and moments. Number 4, UFC 305. The UFC's return to Australia after 2 pay-per-views down under last year gave us a fun card with some stacked names where atop the bill, Israel Adesanya was looking to reclaim gold in a grudge match versus Dricus du Plessis with some fun matchups across the card. The early prelims and prelims were okay with some decent bouts and moments where Jesus Aguilar getting a submission and so did Walter Walker with a weird submission at the end of his bout with Junior Taffa, and Jack Jenkins battering on Herbert Burns who couldn't continue in the 3rd round. The main card is where this card shone and gets its high spot on the list. Carlos Prates got the main card off with a bang with a brutal KO against Li Jingliang, which sent him crashing to the canvas. This was followed by an okay fight between Tai Tuivasa and Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Then the fight of the night with a brilliant war between Dan Hooker and Matthias Gamrot, who scrapped in a competitive and close fight where Hooker got the close decision win to climb back up the lightweight rankings. Kai Kara France took on Steve Erceg, who was coming off his competitive defeat versus Pantoja, where Erceg was the favourite going into the fight, but Kara France would get the upset, KOing Erceg in the 1st round in a brilliant performance, and this was followed with DDP and Izzy having a competitive back and forth fight, where in the 4th round where DDP swung the momentum in his favour and rocked Izzy and would get the fight down to the ground and get Izzy's back and secure the submission to put a definitive end to their rivalry. Some decent prelims and epic main card action. UFC 305 was must watch and has some great replay factor and moments, which is why it earns its high spot on the list. Number 3, UFC 299. One of the most stacked pay-per-views of 2024 and the final pay-per-view of the 200s was headed to Miami in a card with some huge names all over, with some debuting stars and fights across all the divisions in the UFC, headlined by who the UFC was pushing as their next big star, Sugar Sean O'Malley, defending his title against his only loss of his career at that point, Marlon Chito Vera. The whole card was super fun, with prelims which saw debuting Rebeles de Spain get an 18-second KO. However, the rest of his career, which has been bad, has seen him cut from the UFC. Mikael Pereira made quick work of Mikhail Alaslejček. The prelims were nothing special, with Curtis Blades being the highlight, stopping the streak of Jailton Almeida via TKO. The main card is where this card shone, with a stacked main card, where Piotr Jan and Sang Yadong had a competitive back and forth bout, where Jan did brilliantly to win a decision, after he was on a 3-fight losing streak. This was followed by a fight atop the welterweight division, where Jack Della Maddalena took on Gilbert Burns, and got one of the best comeback wins in a fight which was super close and competitive, and being dominated on the ground in the 3rd round, Jack Della Maddalena would work his way up and secure a huge knee and follow up with ground and pound to put Burns away in an epic finish and moment on the main card. This was followed by the debuting Michael Venom Page taking on Kevin Holland, where Venom Page put on a fun striking performance, putting on a show for the fans in a 3-round decision. Benoit Saint Denis and Dustin Poirier put on a scrap in the co-main event, where Poirier got the epic KO to put Saint Denis out cold in an epic win, and Sean O'Malley pieced up Marlon Vera in a one-sided beatdown. A great pay-per-view up and down and one of the best of the year, which earns it a bronze medal. Number 2, UFC 308. The UFC's annual card to Abu Dhabi, which most years is stacked from top to bottom. This year was no different, with an epic card throughout ready to deliver. Headlined by a main event of Ilia Topuria looking to get his first defense of his world title versus Max Holloway, and a co-main event of the returning Khamzat Chimaev taking on Robert Whittaker, looking to make a run for the title. The prelims had some great fights and finishes, with Kennedy and Nzechukwu making quick work of Chris Barnett, Abbas Magomedov finishing Bruno Ferreira by submission, and Ibo Aslan getting a fast TKO. But the prelims were stolen by Mateusz Rebecki taking on Mike Tykbeck Oralby, who went to war in a 3-round fight back and forth, with momentum swinging in both guys' favours in a back and forth fight, where Rombetsky won the decision in a great fight. The main card started with one of the best KOs of the year, with Sharon Magomedov securing the epic spinning back fist KO against Armen Petrosyan. This was followed by a dip in the action, with Lerone Murphy and Dan Ige being a competitive bout, but not the war we all wanted, and Magomed Ankalaev and Alexander Rakic letting us down. The co-main event saw the highly anticipated return of Khamzat Chimaev taking on his real test at middleweight, Robert Whittaker, where Chimaev from the opening second controlled and dominated Whittaker before crushing his jaw with a face crank to get the first round win, to show that the hype is still well and truly real. The main event saw a sight no one could have believed in a competitive bout across 3 rounds between Ilia Topuria and Max Holloway, where Topuria, after wobbling Max Holloway, managed to crack the granite chin of Holloway to put him out cold to defend his world title, beating both Volkanovski and Holloway back to back. UFC 308 was great, with huge stars, moments and great fights. Just this year, nothing could beat the most stacked fight card arguably in the history of combat sports. Number 1, UFC 300. There was never any doubt, the biggest and baddest pay-per-view of the year and maybe ever. The UFC on the eve of the 100 pay-per-views puts on massive pay-per-views with huge stacked cards for UFC 100 and 200, but 300 was the maddest card ever. When the first fight of the night was two former world champions opening the card, we all knew we was in for a treat. The card started with Davidson Figueiredo dominating and beating up Cody Garbrandt, where he would secure the second round submission. Followed this was Bobby Green and Jessica Andrade securing dominant victories, and Renato Moicano securing an epic come from behind win versus Jalen Turner in a fight where he could have been finished in the first round had it not been for Jalen Turner's bad decision making. The prelims would see Diego Lopez make quick work of Sadiq Youssef and Kayla Harrison making her debut and dominating and submitting Holly Holm. The only low point of the card was Aljo having a boring decision win versus Calvin Kattar. Yuri Prohaska and Alexander Rakic had an epic back and forth bout where Yuri in the second round came out like Terminator, pushed forwards and secured the TKO. The main card, Bo Nickel made easy work of Cody Brundage, and Charles Oliveira and Arman Tsarukyan had a close and competitive bout with a hotly contested decision. Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway squared off for the BMF title, where Max Holloway put on a clinic versus Gaethje, piecing him up for 5 rounds, which led to the KO and best moment of the year. With 10 seconds left, Holloway invited Gaethje to trade in the center of the octagon, where Max Holloway would end up KOing Gaethje at the buzzer in an epic KO and moment of the year. Weili Zhang and Yan Xiaonan had a competitive back and forth fight where Xiaonan almost got KO'd and submitted in the fight, but rallied and fought back, but Zhang would dominate and maintain to win the decision. And the man of the year, Alex Pereira, who stepped up to headline UFC 300, would KO Jamal Hill in an epic KO and moment after being low blowed, stepping Herb Dean aside and cracking Jamal Hill and sending him plummeting to the canvas. Huge fights, names, moments, KOs. UFC 300 delivered easily the best pay-per-view of the year and one of the best of all time, which is why it easily wins the spot as the best UFC pay-per-view of 2024. Did you enjoy the video? Let us know down in the comments below. How would you rank all the UFC pay-per-views of 2024? Put that down in the comments below. And what was your favourite pay-per-view of 2024? Put that down in the comments below. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe for more MMA and fight content coming soon. We hope you enjoyed the video and we'll catch you in the next one.